Minister, I've listened today to some scepticism of the import of this bill, but I have to say I'm quite hopeful that the move of the disability portfolio into the Department of Children Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth will be effective, and it'll be a worthwhile one. I believe that as we move towards a rights-based approach to addressing the requirements of persons with disabilities and the provision of services around that, this new context for policy and legislation will be quite important. And I have to say, I think, in fairness to Minister Rabbitte, you have an excellent approach to your brief, and I can see you working incredibly hard to meet the challenges that the sector faces. And I believe that Minister O'Gorman will support you well in that. And I hope the committee, in fact, and Deputy Canny mentioned it, that the Committee on Disability Matters, who are tasked with implementing the UNCRPD or overseeing that, can assist you in it, because I have learned in the few years that I've been here that there genuinely is a cohort of politicians and parliamentarians in the Oireachtas that are totally committed to the issue, and I can reflect on Deputy Canny's feeling of inadequacy when you hear the lived experience of people, but I don't think it's from a lack of commitment, because certainly on both sides of the House there's serious commitment from people. However, I would like to take the opportunity today to situate the policy work that we have to do in the next few years in the lived experience of people with disabilities and their families, and in particular, as we're moving to this new context, I believe we should be considering it in the context of financial independence and inclusion for those with disabilities. We've heard lots of numbers this afternoon, but you know, the CSO numbers from 2017 suggest that there are over 130,000 people with disabilities who are living in danger of consistent poverty. And in the last 2 years, of course, COVID-19 has had a specific effect on people with disabilities, and it's been incredibly hard on some people, and we have to factor that into our plans for the next few years. But we could also see the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to put people with disabilities and their rights at the very centre of action, and direct funding to support accessible and inclusive communities. I think we've all realised how much we rely on our communities in the last 2 years. And it's important that measures are strengthened to support people with disabilities to transition out of and prevent them from falling into poverty. And I'm saying that, with a particular mind to the level of inflation that we're seeing at the moment. Of course, levels of poverty inevitably interact with other components of our family life and of our community life. And we know that 30% of persons with disability, for example, only 30% are in paid work. And for people with visual impairment, that's only 24%. And that in general, our numbers of employment in the disability community are around 20% lower than the EU average. And that's a stark number. We know that persons with disability consistently struggle to find suitable and secure housing, and that some people wait for 5 to 10 years for state-provided housing. The housing situation for people with disabilities, of course, is just a kind of a crisis within a crisis, within the broader housing crisis. But it does demonstrate a housing sector that's not really working for people with disabilities. And there's huge levels of uncaptured need on top of this, because there'd be a lot of young people or people with disabilities who are living with parents and wouldn't necessarily be on, be captured within those numbers, who would have no prospect of moving out and living independently, or are living with elderly carers. And of course, a core problem there is access to the HSE support package. And I could continue on highlighting those kind of issues through education, through health, through mental health. And I think today it's really important, as we're doing this changeover, to recognise that the history of persons with disabilities in this state has been one of poverty and of social inclusion, and that it's a legacy that's very important for us as parliamentarians, and particularly parliamentarians who are on the government side of things, to recognise. And on average, as we've heard other deputies say, other EU countries spend about 2% of their GDP on social protection for disability, and Ireland in the past has spent far less than this. And the Disability Capacity Review gives some indication of the level of investment that will be required, and those numbers are really considerable. To make the changes we need for persons with disability, we'll not only need to be ambitious, but we're also going to need to be really diligent and comprehensive. So I'm very, I'm welcoming the proposed assisted decision-making capacity amendment bill, which would include measures to further realise the UNCRPD in Ireland, including, and very importantly, legislating for the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission to be a national monitoring body for the UNCRPD. And I think that that's really an important move, that we are going to need serious oversight and to keep ourselves honest, because it is incredibly complex and it does sit across a number of departments. Poverty, and to bring it back to that issue again, seen through the lens of disability, is a relentless and hungry opponent for many people. It can steal their energy, it can steal your ambition, it can steal your hope, and it can make every task and every goal, every day, feel like a Herculean undertaking. And I think it's the mandate of this government and of everybody in this House, because I know so many people care genuinely about this, to ease that burden for persons with disability. So I suppose the short version of what I wanted to flag today is that I'm asking that this change would be a kind of a mandate to reach out, not just to the various representative groups of persons with disabilities, not just to the service providers, and not just to the individuals themselves who experience disability every day, but for us in this House to reach out to other departments. Issues around disability reside in the Department of Housing, like the Irish Wheelchairs Association call for a change to building regulations and access. It resides in the Department of Social Welfare, like, as we just heard, the request for the €20 recognition of poverty payment that Deputy Canny brought up, which has been highlighted by the Disability Federation. It resides in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, in the need for equality budgeting and for wellbeing indicators. That would be so important for people with disabilities as a means of going beyond the traditional metrics of GDP, and it would be a way of measuring progress and assisting in reducing poverty and strengthening economic and social rights for marginalised groups, of which, of course, persons with disability are one. And of course, it must also reside in the Department of the Taoiseach, where major nation-building decisions are made, like the creation of the National Development Plan, which the Disability Matters Committee made a submission to, and in the Department of Employment, when we talk about Section 38 and 39 organisations. I want to say, Minister, I can think of actually few better parliamentarians suited to the task of reaching out beyond the boundaries of your brief and making your influence felt in all sorts of decisions from other departments. And I wish you well, and I look forward to supporting you in that.